When you think Rome, you think war, and you think about a military machine. We're going to talk about the origins of that today and how Rome basically goes and starts to be the type of military force that is commonly associated with them. But as we'll see initially, they didn't exactly start off that way, and there's going to be a bit of a learning curve. And these Punic Wars are going to be a famous, famous story of the battles between Rome and the Carthaginians. Now, we got to talk about some Celts. Those crazy Celts. I love the Celts. The Celts are absolutely nuts. They're basically, they live in the region is called Gaul back then, which is modern-day France. And they also live in Britain as well. They wore something called a torque. This is a torque right here. And a torque was basically an ornate ring that they wore around their neck. And according to their tradition, if they wore it, they could not be killed. They were invincible. So they would basically go, run into battle completely naked. They would basically spike up their hair with wet lime and would stick up. And they had basically like bleached hair. And they would get into a Celtic fury. So you have a bunch of naked, crazy, screaming dudes with spiked hair that run straight at you. And they absolutely went and annihilated the Romans. The Romans were not prepared. This is early on when Rome is not a military powerhouse. And they're going to go say, we will never let this happen again. The Romans were cowards. They had to go. There's a story of Romans going and hiding within one of the temples when the Celts came. And the Celts go and they see a statue, and they see a beard on the statue, and they pull down on the beard, and they realize it's a real dude. It was a Roman hiding like a little chicken. However, another famous story from the Celtic sack of Rome is a bunch of geese actually went and started attacking the Celts to protect a sacred hill. So maybe the geese were on their side. The point here of this is that Rome says, we are never, ever going to let our city get sacked again. And they're going to go and develop into an effective military fighting force. So let's start some conquering. Why not, right? It's Rome. And they're going to go and begin to expand. We talked about their kind of origins. And they're going to go into other parts of Italy. One of the most famous battles is between the Greek king Pyrrhus. He goes and he invades Italy. And he goes and he fights a really big battle against the Romans. And he's actually going to win the battle. However, he's going to eventually lose the war. So there's a term, basically it's called Pyrrhic victory. And the term is actually still used today. It's the idea that you devote all of your resources towards one thing. Like, for example, King Pyrrhus is only focusing on the battle. But he went and eventually lose the war. So it may be short term he wins, but long term he doesn't. So that's what a Pyrrhic victory is. And he said basically, if we attack Rome, again, I'm going to die. So Rome was going to start to build an imperial-esque system. There'll be roads, there's colonies, the patron-client treaties. Patron is the person basically who is above the client. But the idea here is we're not at the period of the Roman Empire yet. They're more talking about allies and establishing that type of ally-type government. We're not at the empire with a big emperor extended all. They're just basically going and forming the origins of their military. Now, the three Punic Wars really go and define the Roman Empire. The word Punic is actually the Latin word for Phoenician, because if you remember, go watch the Phoenician video if you need to recap. The Phoenicians built colonies, and I mentioned that back then, one of the colonies they built was at Carthage. The Phoenicians became the Carthaginians. Here's what happened. The Carthaginians, they have their own little empire, and they invade Sicily, which is very, very close. It's actually part of Greece at the time. It's very, very close to the tip of Italy. And Rome says, well, how should we deal with this? There's some people invading land really close to us. Should we go fight back? And they do, and that sparks the First Punic War. Look at this. This is a long period of time, 264 to 241 BC or BCE. Carthage has the definite advantage. They have an advantage in naval warfare. Rome's really doesn't have a fleet of ships. They're going to have to go and do that. Eventually, what Rome did is they basically said, we could win a battle on the land, we can't win on the sea. So they invented basically a form of a ship that they would come alongside the other Carthaginian ship, lower a bridge, and then their soldiers would run onto the Carthaginian ship and fight them. So they essentially did something pretty smart. They turned a sea battle into a land battle. They changed it that way. And after a long, long time, after 23 years of conflict, what happens is Carthage is going to surrender. Carthage loses, and they're forced to pay indemnity. Indemnity is, hey, you fought a war against us, you lost, you owe us money. So the Carthaginians are forced to pay money. Rome lost about 700 ships. Carthage lost about 500 in total. The war, the Roman historian Polybius commented at the time, this was the most destructive war of casualties in the history of warfare, according to him, even more than Alexander the Great's casualties. In this kind of system, Rome lost about 50,000 citizens. It's a lot of people. What part of their indemnity was the Carthaginians had to pay 66 tons of silver in 10 annual installments. Further clauses said that the allies of both sides wouldn't attack each other, no attacks would be made by these allies, and they couldn't recruit soldiers from either side. What this basically was the downfall of the Carthaginians for the time being. Sicily is going to go become a Roman province and part of the Roman Empire, essentially. So let's take a look at the map here. Here's Carthage. Like I said, that's with the Phoenician colony, Rome. And then things get a bit uncomfortable when they invade Sicily. You can see how close it is to the boot of Italy, and that sparks the First Punic War. Now, the Second Punic War is in some ways even more important than the first one. It is argued by many people this is the most significant Roman war ever because Rome was getting its butt kicked, essentially, but they held together, and they're able to defeat one of the most best-known military geniuses of all time, the Carthaginian leader Hannibal. What Hannibal does is he helps rebuild the military. And what he's going to do, he's essentially going to go and lead a military invasion of Rome. And for over a decade, Hannibal is going to go around Rome and countryside and absolutely kick some major butt. He's going to go all these battles. Nobody can fight against the Carthaginians. They're going to win. Very famously, he marches his elephants across the Swiss Alps, and the elephants, a lot of them actually die. But these are war elephants. Very famous sight of Hannibal going and taking his 36 elephants across the Alps. Like I said, if you're an elephant lover, sorry, a lot of the elephants die actually because it's during the winter. But basically what happens here is this. Hannibal's kicking some major butt. And he hasn't attacked the city of Rome itself. He's kind of waiting to have that strength. And Rome, the only advantage they have is that their city itself hasn't been attacked. And what happens here is they say the only way we can beat Hannibal is if we can draw him back to Africa. And a guy named Scipio, a Roman leader, decides, hey, while he's gone, let's go attack the Carthaginians. So they actually lead an attack to Carthage. Hannibal is forced to pull back his attack and defend his city. Scipio wins, and he gets the title Scipio Africanus, which means he's Scipio who conquered Africa, which is where the Carthaginians are. So the Second Punic War, Carthage loses. They have to go and, as a punishment, they have to give up Spain. They have to, essentially, their navy is limited to 10 ships, is nothing. And they have to pay some more money. Why not? So Scipio's a big old hero. Everybody loves him. It's just a very, very famous turning point for Rome and Roman history because Hannibal was a military genius. People still study him today, very much like Alexander the Great. So you can take a pause here and look at some of the war routes if you're into the maps and take a look at Hannibal's routes. So there's Hannibal going and crossing over with his elephants. Now the Third Punic War I refer to as the slaughter because it was highly unnecessary. Basically what happened was Carthage was destroyed, more or less. And a guy named Cato the Elder, who is a senator, we talked about the Senate in the last video, he was a hawkish senator, meaning he would like to go to war. And Cato the Elder decided, he basically made a speech in front of the Senate, made a really long speech, and then at the end of the Senate he just said, by the way, I think Carthage should be destroyed. Let's just annihilate them. And everybody goes and basically gets behind Scipio. And that starts the Third Punic War. It's not really a war because it's more of a slaughter than anything. Rome basically goes and starts trying to bully Carthage around in order to go and get Carthage to have a reason to go to war, but Carthage isn't even giving in. Finally, they just decide, all right, we're going to attack you. We don't care what you do. And they attack the Carthaginians. The Carthaginians have no chance. The Carthaginians made makeshift weapons out of women's hair for the bows. Okay, they had like no supplies. All the Carthaginians were slaughtered. There was about 50,000 left. They actually went and basically scattered them about, destroyed the cities. They burned it, and basically for about 2 weeks destroyed everything down in the city, and then went and poured salt on the land so nothing would ever grow. So the Third Punic War is absolutely unnecessary. It's a complete slaughter by the Romans, genocide if you want to call it, something along those lines, where they go, and it's just a one man taking on a little weakling. So all three Punic Wars, if you caught, Rome wins them all, although the first two are a bit harder for them to win. At this point, after they go and take over Carthage, Rome is going to expand. They're going to be taking over Greece. They got Spain. They obviously have the whole boot. They have these islands. They have Africa. And Rome, as we know it, is beginning to form, and they're becoming a military force to be reckoned with.